Greetings one and all and welcome to the Mystic Mind Analysis. I am the Nightmare Rider, Major Mind, reminding you, as always, that even a cheeseburger can be deconstructed to the original source. Bloom and Gloom has become an episode that I'm finding quite frustrating to talk about, so I don't think I can be entirely fair on my own, critically speaking. As such, I think it's time to bring in a little bit of help to balance things out, just that little bit. Now, how did that spell go? Thingwi Magunath Cthulhu Yerwag Now Vatagan? Wrong one! Get away, get away! Ah, here we go. Open Sesame!
What in the world? Real me didn't even send me. Must have been a glitch in the system.
Welcome to the land of mind and magic, my friend.
Oh, so you're the one that caused that glitch. Pretty weird stuff you conjured up.
Oh, it wasn't that difficult. All I had to do was reverse the polarity of the magical neutron flow, thereby manipulating the fabric of the mana stream to conjure up a subconscious thought stream of any pony I require input on.
Right. In any case, I'm Geeky Steven. What am I even doing here? Usually Real Me sends me through an email.
Well, that would be far too mundane for a magic scholar such as myself, so I need to make the whole process as needlessly complicated as possible. Anyway, I need a more positive voice to balance out my analysis of the new MLP episode. So what are you saying aiding me in presenting a balanced perspective for this week?
Sounds pretty interesting. I'm game. I mean, this whole episode is weird, but it's a good kind of weird, I think. It shows that Josh Haber can make good stuff. That is, when he's not writing simple ways.
Yeah, the less said about that episode the better. Well, I think we can begin to agree on one point here. Josh Haber definitely has a lot of creative potential. At some point in their lives, all children are going to start worrying about the future. Considering how the CMCs have defined their friendship on finding their cutie marks, it makes sense they would be worried about the reality of actually getting one, especially when they don't entirely understand how the whole process of getting a cutie mark actually works to begin with. However, where I think Josh Haber's limitations are in the story writing. The structure of the whole repeating dream sequence felt exceptionally predictable, without any attempts for Applebloom to progress in fighting these fears other than getting rid of a cutie mark, which after the first time you'd think she'd learn is not exactly going to work.
To be fair, her not fighting back plays into the whole anxiety aspect. In dreams like these, the sleeper often has no ability to fight back, even if they want to. They just have to kind of play along as the dream moves in unrealistically fast paces. From that perspective, her not doing anything makes sense, because Applebloom literally can't do anything about what's happening in these sequences. Really, I give this episode praise because of its portrayal of anxiety-induced dreaming. They handled the entire concept in a surprisingly relatable and realistic way. Admittedly, all these anxieties were explained in the beginning, but I don't think these dreams are created from those alone. Instead, they're likely centered around built-up stress, not just in Applebloom's case, but in Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle's. Everything they've been through up to this point, in conjunction with the what happens next factor mentioned here, has funneled up a sense of worriness, and I think this is where it all comes into play.
I see where you're coming from, and I would definitely agree that the escalating weirdness of the dream only adds to Applebloom's downward spiral of anxiety, with the unrealistic fears getting more intense with less ability to control the situation. From a character perspective, this all fits. However, I am looking at this from a story perspective, since this is a very story-driven episode. To be clear, I define a story-driven episode to be where the characters react to the unfolding events around them, rather than the characters creating the events directly. As such, the way that Applebloom keeps thinking she wakes up only to get a new cutie mark each time got old fast. Why did the story of each scene need to get simpler, instead of getting more complex and disjointed as time goes on?
Because these scenarios are supposed to get progressively worse for Applebloom. In each dream, she loses something she holds dear, whether it be the farm, her friends, or her family. It's a case of just how bad can things get. If it was just the Thunderbugs, we wouldn't really have a clear idea on what struggles Applebloom by herself is worrying about going through. It's bad for every pony, but for Applebloom, she at least still has her friends and family, and losing either of those, in her case, is worse.
Well, in that case, why couldn't the progression have become increasingly disjointed without the formula of waking up, realizing she has a cutie mark, disaster, and the whispering voice removing it yet again? I get that these are different case scenarios, but if we are using the full extent of the dreamscape, escape, the whispering voice could have changed the cutie mark with the surroundings changing accordingly, or without them being a direct literal depiction. The first story was clever because it showed Applebloom using her skill to great effect, so I don't see why we couldn't have gotten some kind of variation on it afterwards. I think we need to restore some balance here. So, Stephen, why don't you talk about an aspect of the episode you didn't like?
I did find a couple things wrong with it, but they're just nitpicks. We'd be wasting time with them.
Seems to me you need a bit of encouragement. Try this spell on for size. Inglovis Nutis! Now, let's address those nitpicks and I'll change you back.
Well, there's one coding error. Thanks for nothing. One thing I can address is the overall unimportance of this episode. Sure, it concludes the whole Luna and CMC arc that's been going on since Season 3, but that was sort of a given for this episode. We already had an episode with Scooch and Sweetie. The Apple family's blank flank was bound to get her time in the spotlight eventually. The only thing that I can think of having any significance later on is Babseed's life after getting her cutie mark, which this episode addresses. Unless we get another episode with Babseed that revolves around that point, I don't see this episode carrying much weight.
That is a very fair point. After all, the CMCs will undoubtedly be questing for their cutie mark still, so it doesn't immediately look like there will be much lasting character development. Speaking of Babs, I do wish she was more than just a framing device to get the ball rolling for the what-ifs that Applebloom starts to worry about. However, I see this fact as forgivable because we are focused on the CMC's reactions to this news and not how Babs progressed to this point. And on that note, how about we both highlight what we feel to be the best aspect of this episode overall?
As I said, the main reason I like this episode is the focus on anxiety. It's dark, realistic, and it makes sense for some pony like Applebloom to go through it. It shows that she's growing up and learning more not just about cutie marks, but even the world she lives in. That aspect alone makes this an enjoyable episode for me.
For me, it was the lesson that Princess Luna gave at the end. Even though it was largely spelled out for Applebloom, it is such a critically important message that I think both children and adults can learn from. You are not alone in your fears. We are often our own worst enemies, and so can easily lead ourselves to a never-ending cycle of self-doubt and lack of action. However, if we are honest about ourselves and focus on what we are good at, having responsibilities in life won't be disastrous. If we share these fears with our friends and support each other, we can learn to mitigate them and accept that they aren't rational. I think that just about covers everything there is to say about this episode. So, Geeky Stephen, how about you start a post-episode wrap-up with your general thoughts and a small rating of the episode?
Well, I already told you guys the main reason I like this episode, and explaining it once again would only be redundant. Still, this episode has quite a few good bits in it. It's surreal, relatable, and even pretty dark every once in a while. While this episode probably won't have much influence later on, I think there's a lot of entertaining content here, especially if you're one of those people who enjoy CMC episodes. For me, this episode is worth a B.
In spite of my general negativity towards the episode, I will be perfectly honest and say that it wasn't bad as a whole, just lackluster. On the one hoof, the awkward pacing and reusing of the same scenes in a different way contributes to Applebloom's growing anxiety about her future with a cutie mark. But on recycling this same setup, it got repetitive fast, which just annoys me when there is so much potential to make a story less generic as a whole, especially considering the first part of the dream. Still, the moral is just enough to make it slightly above average, so I give Bloom and Gloom a final grade of a C+. Well then, thanks for joining me, Stephen. I'm glad you were able to contribute an enthusiastic voice of positivity to what would have otherwise been a nitpicky analysis.
No problem. Positive? Yes. Enthusiastic? Perhaps. It depends on how these lines come out. So, how are you going to get me back to the digital world? Gonna use more of your magical know-how?
Oh, I had my ways. Just look below you.
Wait, what?
Works like a charm every time. Until the next time, this is the Nightmare Rider, Mage of Mind, riding out.
Hey, Steven, how'd that crossover with Nightmare turn out?
Well, it wasn't so bad. I just wish he hadn't been so forceful with his magic. I mean, now I have nuke code.
A newt?
I got better.
Sounds just like him.
It's been a busy night for us all, but I think it's time to bring it to a close.
Hello, Ed boys! Many